Hi everyone, imagine a world where every sensation, from light to touch to smell, overwhelms your body with pain. This is my reality, thanks to fibromyalgia. I want to tell you how I manage these challenges and still have a productive and meaningful life. I hope this story will inspire you to develop your own resilience to meet the unique challenges in your own life. Keep watching to learn more. This video has 3 parts: fibromyalgia background, my symptoms and adaptations, and life reimagined. Part 1. Fibromyalgia background. Fibromyalgia is a really mysterious illness. A lot of doctors don't even really believe it exists, and although the medical community has decided to believe that it exists in recent years, it's still not very well understood. The simplest description of fibromyalgia is that your nervous system and your brain dramatically amplify your experience of pain. Something that would normally be a little bit painful is very painful, and something that would normally not be painful at all might actually be interpreted by your body as pain. For example, there's one symptom called allodynia, which is basically just pain on touch. Just the lightest touch, even breeze on your face or your hand, or even potentially temperature changes and that sort of thing, could all be interpreted as pain. Most people with fibromyalgia have pain all over their body. And as you can tell by the name fibromyalgia, myalgia means pain, and fibro is the fibrous muscle tissues. So a lot of people have pain in their muscles, tendons, myofascial connective tissue, such as the myofascial tissues just under your skin. But really any nerve activation can be interpreted as pain. So that means any sensory input. It also means any mobility activity that you might be trying to perform, like walking or doing fine motor control with your hands. Fibromyalgia doesn't normally occur entirely on its own. Usually there's some other underlying condition which your body, while it's trying to figure out how to deal with, develops secondary fibromyalgia as a side effect. Primary fibromyalgia is possible, it's just rare. And fibromyalgia is not life-threatening on its own. It's just increased pain, basically. It's like your body is always in fight or flight mode. It can really impact your standard of living, but it's not going to directly threaten your lifespan. Fibromyalgia is a chronic health condition, and it's the worst kind. It's an invisible chronic health condition. That, combined with the fact that it's a secondary condition a lot of the time, means that fibromyalgia hasn't been studied in nearly as much detail as more common and more serious illnesses. It doesn't help that 80% of all fibromyalgia patients are women, because that would have historically deprioritized fibromyalgia for research finding. There's actually a theory about that, why women experience autoimmune conditions more frequently than men do. Fibromyalgia isn't technically considered an autoimmune condition right now, but it's sort of similar. It has to do with the fact that women have 2 X chromosomes, and the X chromosomes contain more information. They're better for creating antibodies in your body to fight diseases, but they're also more likely to backfire. So when you have 2 copies of the X chromosome, you have twice as many chances for your immune system to backfire and for you to develop an autoimmune condition, basically. So some takeaways about fibromyalgia: people experience tight muscles and muscle pain a lot. Your nervous system often gets involved because any nerve activation can be triggering, can be interpreted as pain. And finally, important point, fibromyalgia pain is real pain. The neurological pathways in your central nervous system and in your brain that get triggered are the same ones that get triggered whenever anyone else experiences pain. It can be really hard to tell because fibromyalgia is an invisible condition, and you can't get inside someone else's head and experience the same pain that they're experiencing. So a lot of fibromyalgia patients might feel like they're not being validated by the people around them, but I'm here to tell you that their pain is real pain. In fact, let's talk a bit about how pain works. When you take a hammer and you hit your thumb with it, the nerves in your thumb send an electrical signal up through your arm, through your central nervous system, to your brain. Your brain then goes, man, that doesn't look right, and it starts projecting downwards to your thumb to give you the experience of being in pain. But the pain is entirely in your brain. It's localized, it's projected onto your thumb because you have lived in your body all your life and you know that these nerve endings are associated with this finger in your body. But the pain isn't in your finger in any sense of the word. The nerves in your finger are the ones firing signals, and your brain thinks, that's pain. The point is, though, that sometimes it can be hard for your brain to pinpoint in your body exactly where pain is coming from. Your brain is just triangulating based on all the touch sensations that you've seen in the past, based on your sense of proprioception, and then it projects that pain to where it thinks the pathology or the injury is. But your brain can get this wrong. It's particularly common for the long nerves that, for example, go all the way down your leg or all the way down your arm through your shoulder. You can have a nerve impingement, which means your nerve is getting compressed at some point along your whole arm, and your brain might be telling you, ow, my hand hurts, but the problem is actually in your shoulder. It's actually very common for people that get carpal tunnel or other nerve issues for the pain to be experienced in the wrong location. The severity of pain is also a learned attribute. There's a fascinating TED Talk about pain, which I'll link in the description below, where this friendly Australian guy describes how he was walking through the bush and got bitten by a deadly snake, and he barely felt a pinch on his ankle. He just thought it was a branch brushing by his foot. So he nearly died. He was hospitalized, but he recovered. And then later, he was walking through the bush again and felt a small pinch on his ankle. And this time round, his brain was like, whoa, last time this happened, you almost died. And so his brain started projecting causing an immense amount of pain to his leg. He was like hopping around on one foot because he couldn't stand the pain. But this time, it wasn't a snake that had bitten him, it was just a branch. Similarly, there's a condition called peripheral sensitization, where one of your arms or legs has sustained an injury, or at any rate, the nerves have been firing pain signals for a long period of time. The body actually doesn't get desensitized to this. Instead, it tries to pay attention to the problem and makes that limb even more sensitive. So this can be a really big problem when you're trying to recover from carpal tunnel and other repetitive strain injuries, for example. And there's a related issue called central sensitization, where your central nervous system, in other words, your spine, also experiences the same thing. It's been receiving too many pain signals, and so it gets ramped up in terms of its sensitivity, which of course impacts your entire body. And that's very closely related to fibromyalgia, but it can evolve entirely from too many pain signals over time, while fibromyalgia is more often a secondary evolution because of some underlying condition that your body is experiencing. Part 2, my symptoms and adaptations. First of all, I know this section is probably going to sound unbelievable depending on your own experiences and how you stumbled across my video. All I'll say is trust me on this. I'll try to provide video evidence, aka B-roll, related to the things I'm talking about. This type of pain is debilitating, and I'm only able to talk about it now because I have a bit of distance. I found a new medication earlier this year that helps immensely. If you know someone with fibromyalgia, I strongly recommend that they try all of the available medications for it, because some of them help and some of them don't for each person. First, let's talk about my hands. For almost 10 years now, I've had pain in my hands whenever I use them for anything. The biggest impact for me has been typing, which I can no longer really do. A handful of keystrokes every minute is sort of okay. If I overuse my hands, then they'll get really sore and they might remain that way for 48 hours. I use voice recognition for everything, for interacting with computers and phones and every device possible. In fact, I actually have a separate microphone here, which I can switch on at any moment, and that's how I do the voice recognition to my computer. And of course, you can see me wearing these compression gloves, which I use to provide a non-pain sensation to my hands, which helps to counteract the pain signals that my brain is receiving. I made a whole other video that basically just talks about my hands, so I'll link it up here, and you can go watch that if you're interested. Second, let's talk about my legs. For the past 10 years, I've had difficulty walking up hills to varying degrees. In the past few years, it's been almost impossible for me to walk up hills. Any slant whatsoever, I would not be able to walk on. Oftentimes, I wouldn't even be able to take full steps, just kind of shuffling along, because I couldn't take my right foot and put it backwards behind my center of mass, basically. The nerves in my right leg were probably shortened, and there was a lot of fibromyalgia pain in the muscles that were clamping on the nerves and kind of really holding them in place. If I encountered uphill, I would have to walk sideways or backwards, or more likely just find a different route entirely, call an Uber or something. Funnily enough, accessible ramps, like for wheelchairs, were the worst for me because they're always fairly steep and I couldn't handle them at all. I would have to go and find stairs. So what's accessible for one person could be the worst thing possible for another. If I tweaked my nerves by stretching my foot a little too far, it could last for months. There were long periods where I could barely even walk from room to room. Now though, that new medication that I mentioned has basically eliminated the excess sensations from the nerves in my legs, which leaves me with just the tight muscles. So now I stretch and do exercises for just over an hour every morning, and then I go for a 20 or 30 minute walk. And this routine over the last 6 months has almost completely reversed all the issues with my legs. I can now walk up hills and down hills, of course, that are quite steep, probably steep enough that you wouldn't really want to take them on a bicycle, for example. Third issue is smell. Also, I'm going through these issues in roughly chronological order in terms of when they started impacting me. So my sense of smell started acting up a couple of years ago, I guess about 4 years ago now. And remember how I said anything could be interpreted as pain? Well, for me, it was basically the smell of food changed from being tantalizing and delicious into painful. So I have to eat very bland foods that have almost no smell. I really enjoy fruit, and there are still some fruits that I can eat, but I have to eat them while they're almost green, because as they start to get ripe, their smell and their flavor becomes stronger and I can't handle them anymore. It's hard for me to eat food that was prepared the day before, even if it's not fruit, even if it's just rice, for example, since the smell changes and the amount of histamines increases, so I have to always prepare my food freshly. Also, I wear a nose plug whenever I'm trying to eat, which basically cuts down on the amount of smell that gets into my brain. Strong non-food smells, like flower blossoms, car exhaust, or vinegar, also give me a lot of trouble. But generally speaking, with nose plugs and a strict diet, it all works out. Fourth issue, my throat gets dry very quickly, so my voice, whenever I talk, is always on the edge. I'm always on the edge of losing my voice. This is probably due to Sjogren's syndrome under the hood, but it's made a lot worse by fibromyalgia. If I try to talk for more than a minute or two, I have to constantly drink hot water. And I normally cut it out of my videos, but I have this water beside me at all times. and it's set to 60 degrees Celsius by a kettle over there, which heats up the water and then keeps it at that temperature so that I always have access to hot water whenever I need it. If I'm out and about away from my house, a few sentences are fine, but if I'm getting into a conversation with someone, I have to get some hot water from a restaurant or something and then just start drinking it. The water provides moisture and also warmth, which is important for me. Cold water doesn't really do it at all. Fifth issue is sight or vision. The biggest hurdle for me right now is that my eyes are really sensitive to light. It originally developed as a reaction to dry eyes, again, which may have been Sjogren's, and I was having to take eye drops about every 90 minutes. My fibromyalgia started interpreting the dry eyes as pain, and even when the eyes got better, they're almost completely fine now in terms of dryness. The sensitivity remains and has even gotten worse in some ways. The things that bother me are absolute brightness, difference in brightness, so if something bright is over here and something dark is over here, and also any kind of movement. So if I'm looking out of a car window, for example, or especially if I'm watching any kind of video and there's horizontal movement or movement in or out of the screen, that will give me an instant headache and I have to close my eyes and put a blindfold on for a couple of minutes before it passes. I had to replace all the lights in my apartment with adjustable brightness lights, and they're set almost to their minimums. For example, in this room, it's not quite bright enough for me to read, and that's why my image on YouTube is never properly lit. The big issue is I can't have lights shining into my eyes. So I have some side lighting over here, and I have light boxes over here and over here, but they're fairly dim and they're not straight on the way they should be. So my face is not properly lit, but it's the best I can get given my light sensitivity. If I'm looking at my phone or at a computer screen, it has to be in dark mode and at nearly minimum brightness. The brightness difference thing also comes into play here. So if I'm looking at the screen in a slightly brighter area, then I have to make it brighter as well. For anything that's not dark colored, I actually have to wear these glasses in order to look at it. So if I'm looking at something on my screen that's white, or even on my phone looking at a web page and it's brighter than normal, I have to wear these or I'll get a headache quite quickly. Of course, I researched the monitor and the devices that have the minimum possible brightness that exist, basically. I found a database of all the laptops and phones from the last 5 years, including their nits in terms of brightness, and that's how I choose what to buy. Finally, whenever I go outside, I have to wear these, which are basically full darkness ski goggles. I've tried a lot of other types of glasses and goggles, but when I'm outside, I have to block the light coming in from all angles, so it has to be like wraparound sunglasses or whatever, and I've just not found anything that works as well as ski goggles. Luckily, I can handle looking at brightish lights for a short period of time. It just builds up sensation very rapidly, so if I do it for more than like 30 seconds, I'll be sitting in a corner with eye covers on for a while. So it makes it possible to pass airport security. Not pleasant, but possible. There are a lot of implications of not being able to see very well. For example, I can't watch shows or anime or a lot of YouTube content anymore, which used to be my primary source of entertainment, especially when my hands were sore. So I've had to shift my behaviors a lot. I listen to audiobooks a lot now. I used to not even really understand what was happening in audiobooks and get really impatient, but now my brain is used to consuming that kind of content. But overall, I'm very lucky because I've managed to find workarounds for almost anything that I want to do, including photography or working on my phone or looking at a computer, browsing the internet, etc. Okay, sixth issue, sound. Actually, just kidding. My sound is totally fine right now. It's the only one of my 5 senses, I think, that's not impacted yet. But fibromyalgia patients do frequently get sensitivity to sound. It's much more common than sensitivity to light, for example. So I'm extra cautious with loud or repetitive sounds. I have earmuffs that I use when I'm using the blender in the kitchen every day to make lunch, for example. And sometimes while I'm making lunch, I'll look at the mirror and see myself, envision it, wearing earmuffs, wearing a nose plug, probably wearing dark glasses for vision, in a dimly lit room, wearing compression gloves and compression socks. It's just an insane amount of adaptations, and yet they all work very well for me. I'm really hoping to preserve my hearing though, because being able to switch to an audiobook at any moment when something else is in pain is really fantastic. Part 3, Life Reimagined. I'm sorry, the last section probably felt like a lot of doom and gloom, but the point of this video is to show you that even seemingly insurmountable issues, like all the sensory issues that I'm having, can actually be overcome. So if issues of that magnitude can be overcome, imagine what else you can do. I like to think of Stephen Hawking as a role model. His condition, ALS, was sadly degenerative, so his abilities actually decreased a lot over time. And he went through various communication mechanisms with the outside world, like raising his eyebrows or using a switch with one finger, and eventually using custom hardware in his cheek because he could still move his cheek around a little bit to actually dictate words. And he was an incredible scientist, and he wrote books, entire books, with this really slow, like 15 words per minute or less communication mechanism that reached millions of people all around the world. And if he could do that, then maybe I should set my sights a little higher. Of course, it probably helps to have already been a tenured or almost tenured Oxford professor, but I'm working on that, okay? So for me, in future, I know that my health will continue to evolve. Fibromyalgia isn't a degenerative condition like ALS, but from my own experience, I know that any part of my body that has been experiencing pain for some period of time will probably become oversensitized, and that oversensitization seems to be semi-permanent. Of course, over time, sometimes I develop strategies for dealing with some of these issues so that they become almost non-existent, but it does mean that I will continue to have to be flexible in the future. I'll have to have strong mental resilience. Actually, when my hand and leg symptoms first arose, it took years for me to develop appropriate adaptations so that I could actually be comfortable, actually entertain myself and do work. But when my most recent major symptom arose, which is my eye problems, it took just a few months, and I was ordering new monitors, I was putting blackout curtains everywhere, I was setting up appropriate lights in my apartment, and only 6 months later, I was fully adapted and I was visiting Japan. I had an array of different ski goggles that I would swap in and out depending on the brightness of my environment, although it turns out that the darkest one is basically well suited to almost every condition. And I was preparing for YouTube, I had a camera strapped to me all the time, and I had a blast. And I think having your eyes start to fail on you is one of the worst things possible. I didn't think I could get any worse than having my hands sort of stop working properly, but my eyes hit me really hard. However, it didn't last long at all. I just picked myself up and figured out how to deal with it. That was a year ago now. And there's a great coincidence because according to my schedule, the day that this video is supposed to come out, I'll be hopping on a plane, going back to Japan for another trip. So I guess that's one measurement of well-being. Are you able to go on trips to Japan? I have to deal with a lot of job uncertainty. Because of my educational background, I had good reason to believe that it would never be hard for me to get an interesting job. But now the majority of the jobs that I would be well qualified for involve using your hands too much. So I've had to become a lot more comfortable with uncertainty and adaptation and knowing that I can't actually plan everything out and have it work exactly as I had hoped. But the longer I spend outside of academia, the more I see that there are plenty of jobs out there that I would probably be pretty skilled at. But it does put a little bit of added worry into my mind in terms of having to be a bit careful with money because it might be hard to find a job that I can do well. I have a good position right now, but nothing lasts forever, as they say. So I have to be careful. Unless, of course, my YouTube were to blow up, but you'll be glad to know that I'm not counting on it, financially speaking. I mentioned I love to plan, so what I do is I plan trips for myself. I love putting myself into new places, traveling, talking to people, photography. I personally find making friends that can relate to me, relationships, dating, all that is pretty difficult for me. But if I can travel successfully and get all the pieces right in terms of my comfort and my vision and the cost and have fun doing it, then that really feels like an accomplishment. And this year alone, I will have gone on 5 international trips by the end of the year if everything goes according to plan. A big fear for me used to be understandability. I wanted people to be able to relate to me quickly after meeting me, in the sense of feeling they had a connection with me, that they shared lifestyle choices, interests, etc. And fibromyalgia is an invisible condition. I used to look fairly normal, other than not being able to walk up hills. Now there's no hope of that because I'm wearing dark goggles everywhere, and I have a lot of, shall we say, unusual fashion choices. And I still want understandability, but now it's more about me being friendly, and can people connect with me? Can people relate with that? And luckily, what I would say might be my biggest overall strength has not been impacted by fibromyalgia, and that is concentration. People do get what they call fibro fog, or a bit of brain fuzziness when it comes to fibromyalgia, and I do get that, although it may be a side effect of medication. I have word finding difficulties, for example, but my ability to reason, to think logically, and to focus on a task for long periods is still intact. It's what let me finish a PhD despite my hands falling apart. It's what lets me set strict limits for my body that I don't cross over. It's what lets me be consistent about posting YouTube videos despite having a full-time job and a lot of other health conditions at the same time. And it's what lets me research and focus on a completely new topic and therefore make a video for you guys. My brain's been trained as an academic brain for too long, but I think that's the biggest takeaway of all. The discipline and the concentration that you need to get things done might be a little bit more extreme when you have a chronic health condition, but if you set those goals, you can still achieve them. You just have to set aside enough time to listen to your body and give it what it needs, even if those needs would be utterly foreign to anybody else. All right, finally, in conclusion, I talked a little bit about what fibromyalgia is, how it manifests, and I've done a lot of research on fibromyalgia, of course. I'll probably do a more in-depth video at some point going into the health condition. Then I talked a lot about the different symptoms that I get from fibromyalgia, how they impact me, and what I do to mitigate them. It may have been surprising or shocking to hear about, but it's all real, I assure you, and everybody has their own stuff to deal with. This is just mine. In the third part, I talked a bit about the impact that it's having on my life at a bigger scale, and how I'm able to make this video now with a bit of distance from the worst effects. And I'm able to plan and entertain myself and do work and generally have a very fulfilling life. I just have to maintain ironclad control over some boundaries, some time management, get rid of a few hobbies, and introduce others. I want to leave you with with a quote from Stephen Hawking: "Quiet people have the loudest minds." Your mind is a muscle. You can exercise it like you can anything else. Resilience is a muscle. You can exercise it as well. What's that Stoic book? The obstacle is the way. So having a chronic health condition will probably force this upon you, but anybody can try to exercise those muscles, develop the skills to research, to think logically and clearly, focus on developing the resilience that's necessary to understand and deal with gracefully all of the problems that life throws at us. Well, I think this video is longer than I had intended it to be, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe and consider sharing the video with a friend that you think might enjoy it. And if you haven't seen it already, check out this previous video I made where I do a deep dive into my PhD when I was first developing issues with my hands. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.